scheduled for today. We'll start with going through a few housekeeping items. Welcome to the meeting. This is a public meeting, so we are going to record the meeting and it will be made available on the small cell website page on DDOT's website. In terms of using WebEx, right now everyone is on mute. You cannot unmute yourself. We will unmute you during the question and answer comment period of the presentation. So please save your questions till the end of the process. This helps us ensure the meeting runs smoothly. If you would like to speak during that time, please use the raise your hand feature. There's also closed caption options that are shown at the bottom of the screen as well. And there's also a video, which is off by default, and you will not be asked to share. Using the raise hand feature. If you have a question or comment that you would like to speak up about, please raise your hand. This indicates to us that you would like to speak. To virtually raise your hand, click the raise hand icon in the bottom center of the WebEx window. Alternatively, you can press the Control-Shift+R keys on your keyboard to raise your hand. If you joined via a browser or mobile app, click the three-dot icon and select raise hand. If you dialed in by phone, please dial *3 to use the raise your hand function. If you have a question during the presentation, send it via the Q&A feature. To send a question, click the three-dot icon in the bottom right side of the WebEx window and select Q&A. A new panel or window will appear in the Ask field and select All Panelists. Click the text box, type your question, and press the Enter key to send it. If you joined via a browser or mobile app, click the Q&A or question mark icon to access the Q&A to ask a question. If you dialed in by phone, dial *3 to use the raise your hand function. This indicates that you will want to speak. We also have, if you would please use your phone and hold the camera portion up to this QR code. This will take you to the Title VI Public Involvement Demographic Survey for this meeting. And that just allows us to capture some basic information that we can use to better understand who's in attendance. This will also populate at the end of the presentation too. So there's also an opportunity to fill it out. It's just like, I believe, 3 simple questions. Next, let's start the discussion. My name is Kelsey Bridges, and I'm a transportation planner with the District Department of Transportation. I'll let the MLA carriers introduce themselves, starting with Crown Castle, then Verizon, and then AT&T.
Thank you, Kelsey. My name is Ashley Greenspan. I'm an External Affairs Manager at Crown Castle. Crown Castle is a builder of shared communications infrastructure, including small cells.
Hi, good evening. I'm Brian Stover with Verizon Wireless. I'm a project manager for the company in the Washington-Baltimore market. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shannon Powers. I am a real estate construction manager at AT&T.
Thank you.
Can you guys not see me?
No, I cannot. It's like a gray screen.
Oh, no. Again.
But the good news is we can hear you, Shannon. So we'll go ahead and advance, and if we can't get it fixed, we'll at least be able to hear you. So we're now going to begin our presentation for the new pole plant for the DC small cell guidelines. I'll start with an agenda. Today we're going to go over the background of small cells, a technology overview of why they're needed, the permitting small cells in DC, essentially the guidelines that are already in place, discuss those guidelines, and then the design process for the standalone pole, and then present you with the standalone pole design. Essentially, when in 2018, the small cell guidelines were adopted, it was contemplated that there would be a standalone pole added to the guidelines. There's placeholders within the guidelines that talk about the design of the guidelines, the design of the pole. There are guidelines in place that already talk about essentially distance, spacing, and things like that that were adopted in 2019. But we're here today specifically to talk about the pole itself. The design we're sharing today was developed in consultation with staff from the MLA carriers, CFA, NCPC, SHPO, and the Office of Planning. Before I share more of the design, we'll review the technology, permitting process, and highlight some of the key standalone pole guidelines.
Hi, this is Shannon Powers from AT&T. The technology overview: to address the growing demand for wireless technology, small cells are used to increase the capacity of mobile networks. Small cells complement rooftop towers. Both are critical to provide robust mobile connectivity. Small cells are a good complement for dense areas with high capacity needs. Technology overview. Reliable mobile service is essential in an emergency. 50% of U.S. households don't have a landline anymore. 80% of 911 calls are originated through cell phones. Connected patient care keeps residents healthy. Advanced connectivity enables doctors to connect with their patients more frequently and conveniently through telemedicine. Smarter public infrastructure promotes safety. Smart city technicians, like connected traffic systems, can improve driving behavior and congestion, resulting in 15% faster emergency response times and faster cell service aids in critical services. With 5G, the new generation of wireless connectivity, first responders can receive critical information, including video and precise location data in real time. Permitting small cells in DC. DDOT authorization. The federal law requires small cell infrastructure equipment be allowed in the public right-of-way for the FCC small cell order from 2018. DDOT is the asset owner of current streetlights. Both DDOT and the Public Space Committee oversee the permitting process for the public right-of-way. For processing the installation of small cells, the carriers need to enter into a MLA agreement with DC, and there is an MLA link for the agreements that we have. Public notification to property owners of block, SMD representatives, ANC, and ward council members. Public space permit, and NCPC review, CFA review, NCPC review, unallowable areas in federal court interest area maps and adjacent to federal properties and reservations. Permitting small cells in DC, the existing guidelines allow for attachment on existing infrastructures, and we have photos of an external small cell, a strand mount, and a wood pole top.
Thanks, Shannon.
I'm going to take it from here. Thank you.
Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the existing small cell guidelines, which all of the new poles will be subject to these existing guidelines. So as you can see detailed on this slide, there are many restrictions on the locations, appearance, and spacing of small cells, whether they're on a standalone pole or attached to an existing streetlight or wood utility pole. Importantly, the guidelines require that MLA holders always deploy on existing poles when one is available. This reduces the need for any new poles in the right-of-way. It prioritizes accessibility and maintains the pedestrian path and amenity zones as defined within DDOT's guidelines. In addition to being required, using existing infrastructure is also our preference, as it's more efficient and economical. Small cells are not allowed on medians and traffic islands, bridges, tunnels, overpasses, or elevated roadways. They're also prohibited on certain light poles, including Twin 20 and Washington upright poles, and on sidewalks and right-of-ways immediately adjacent to federal property or federal reservations. Exposed wires are prohibited except on utility poles, and advertising is also prohibited. And we must maintain setbacks from elements such as buildings, tree zones, and bike racks. The small cell guidelines were adopted in 2019 following MLA holders, which allowed for the MLA holders to start building small cells on utility poles and pendant streetlights. In early 2022, stakeholders began meeting to work on and review the designs for a standalone pole. As Kelsey mentioned, the working group includes the MLA holders, the DC Department of Transportation, the Commission for Fine Arts, the National Capital Planning Commission, the DC Office of Planning, and the DC Historic Preservation Office. After incorporating comments from the stakeholders, a design for the new pole was presented to the Commission for Fine Arts and the National Capital Planning Commission in the fall of 2023. This month, we're making presentations to the ANCs to get your input. And next month, a Public Space Committee meeting is scheduled to consider the proposed new pole. This process duplicates the process that was followed in advance of adopting the district-wide small cell guidelines back in 2019. So now to talk a little bit about the evolution of the pole. Throughout the conversations with the stakeholder group, we sought to refine the pole design to minimize its impact and assure that it's appropriate for DC in a manner that denotes its utilitarian purpose. We elongated the base to make it slimmer and have reduced it to the smallest form factor possible. We also added a transitional collar to help with the scale of the pole. We heard from the group that the detailed collar wasn't appropriate for a pole that isn't historical, and therefore we simplified that collar. And now I'm going to turn it over to Brian Stover, who's going to talk more specifically about the new pole design.
Thanks, Ashley and Shannon. You did a great job. So I'm going to talk about the pole itself. The working group worked together to initially we started with 3 individual poles, one for each carrier, as they each have unique equipment requirements and needs. And after a lot of discussion, a basic standard universal pole was designed. It has a standard base. The pole itself is standard size, comparable to the existing DC light poles. And then what you'll notice, so that would be the standalone pole on the left-hand side. That's the standard pole. And as we work our way to the right, you can see the AT&T version, the Verizon version, and the Crown Castle version. And what you'll notice is that the top portion of the pole, where the antennas are, is the unique identifier for each carrier. And that just comes down to different equipment manufacturers that each carrier use. And again, the different requirements, based on their frequency and operating parameters. All the poles are comparable in height, just off by a couple inches. And again, the base is identical for all carriers. Next slide. This pole or this image basically just shows the comparison between the pole on the left-hand side being a standalone small cell pole, and then the existing DDOT Cobra head pole, the Globe Washington Globe pole, and then the Twin 20 pole. And what you'll notice here is, the height, in terms of height, it's comparable to the existing Cobra head, or the teardrop pole would also be about that same height. It is slightly taller than the Globe poles, but the base, what we're trying to really illustrate here, I think, is the size of the base cabinet. That the small cell pole, as you can see, is 20 inches in diameter. The Cobra head is slightly smaller at 16 inches. The Globe is at 24 inches, and the Twin 20 at 25. And what this is really illustrating is that the new standalone pole is comparable in size to the existing DDOT infrastructure in the public right-of-way. And as mentioned earlier, these sites, these structures, will have to comply with the existing guidelines, as well as federally mandated guidelines such as ADA, to make sure that we maintain the clearances on the sidewalk. And again, as you can see, these poles are in line with the existing infrastructure already deployed by DDOT. Next slide, please. This is just a little more detailed information regarding that base design. As you can see, it's sort of a cylinder type design at the bottom with access panels. You can see on the left-hand side, that'll or enclose the radio equipment for the small cells, as well as the electric meter that's required for each of these sites. Next slide. And again, just a comparison to what else you find in the public right of way. You can see that the size of the trash receptacle or the traffic control devices in the middle, or the bike rentals on the right-hand side are similar, if not larger, in scale than the proposed small cell standalone pole. Next slide. And here we have some photo simulations. So if it's kind of hard to tell because there's no space between the two photos, but this is a photo on the left without the proposed small cell infrastructure. And then you can see the photo on the right within the center of the picture is a photo image or a photo manipulated image with the small cell drawn in. Next slide. We're going to follow that same theme here. On the left-hand side is basically a before, and on the right-hand side after. And I don't know about you, but as you look at these, it's sort of hard to pick out where the small cell is. It blends in very well from our perspective. Next slide. Same thing here. Before image on the left, proposed image on the right, with again the small cell in the center of the picture. And this, if we can go back to that last slide, I'm sorry. I think, again, this illustrates an area where you might see these small cells deployed. This is an area where the adjacent light poles are the twin 20s, which are currently prohibited. There's not an approved design to co-locate on the twin 20s. So in order to provide the service to these areas, some type of new infrastructure is going to be required. And we believe that the standalone pole that the working group's designed is the appropriate infrastructure for that. And again, this is critical infrastructure to provide critical communications equipment. Next slide. Again, this one is slightly different because it's showing two proposed installations just with a different perspective. And we've added here a person standing next to the pole so you can get a little bit more scale in context with the pole in the surrounding area, with the other infrastructure, the trash receptacle, other light poles and so forth, as well as the pedestrian. And then again, just a different angle showing the same pole. And I think you'll hopefully agree that it's blends in very well with the existing infrastructure already in the right of way. Next slide. I think that brings us to the end.
Thanks, Brian, and everyone else who also spoke. So now we're at the Q&A portion of the presentation. So as a reminder, if you want to add comments into the Q&A, click the three-dot icon in the bottom right side of the WebEx window and select Q&A, and the panel will pop up in an Ask field and select all panelists. You can also add comments to the chat if that's easier for you, or raise your hand and we can select. I'm going to go, I'll leave it here for one moment in case anyone needs to do that, and then I'm going to advance to the next slide, which just has some information about we're at the current meeting, but also just the special public space committee hearing, and then my email contact. So go ahead and advance. So far, no questions. Also, any of the participants, your ANC should have also been notified about the upcoming special public space committee hearing. Again, so that means normally we have one public space committee a month. There will be 2 in February, the general public space committee hearing, and then the special one for the guidelines. So that, and you should have received a notification so that you can also provide any comments and share with your community as well, this information that's part of that TOPS permit. Oops, unmute myself. We do have a question. So the question is, will the new poles replace existing poles, or will the existing poles remain unchanged? The existing poles have the electric meters and boxes outside the poles. The new poles do not. So if I think I'm following this. So we are not, any existing deployed small cells are attached to either like third-party poles, Pepco poles, or allowed to specific pendant poles that are DDOT light fixtures and assets, and those will not change. The anything that is the standalone pole will have to adhere to the design that is we showed here, and those will generally be in locations where the MLA carriers are unable to attach to an existing pole. And I apologize, there's a vacuum in the office right now. But so you'll typically, and Brian alluded to this, where you'll see these frequently or more likely will be locations where there are twin 20s or Washington globes that cannot, where no infrastructure can be attached to, no small cells can be attached to existing infrastructure. And so something new is needed. Any other questions? Okay. If there are any questions that you think of after this meeting or in regards to the public space TOPS permit, you can reach out to me. My Kelsey Bridges at dc.gov, and email is on the screen, and I'll be happy to try and answer your questions. I think that will conclude our presentation. So thank you.
Hi, thank you.